welcome to your #1 television station, OBN Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa program, and I'm your host, Fanta Mbelete. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Benjamin Anyagri, advocate for African Continental Union government and founding member of Agri-Action Movement of Africa. Dr. Benjamin, a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm very much happy to be with you this morning, and greetings to your audience.
Would you introduce yourself to our viewers, please?
Well, I'm an advocate for a Continental Union government of Africa and a founding member of Agriculture Action Movement of Africa, and the immediate past executive director of the Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute.
Wonderful. What does African political administration look like, and how should it be in the future?
Currently, the political administration system of Africa is fragmented. The 55 states have their different system of government, have their own political administrative system. And so, and they have their own ideological underpinnings. They have their own ideological directions that they are following, mostly capitalist driven. And so if you look at the administrative system too, it's something that is hinged on the multi-party democratic system that we practice. And it is something that is imposed on us. And it's got its own operations, such that even during an election time, when the government comes to power, they bring their own set of people to administer the country or administer the state. And whether they are competent or not reflects in the outcomes of the way the country is being ruled. And the fragmented nature of the political system of Africa is something that many of us are not really happy with, and looking for a one system, a one administrative system that governs the whole continent, that has a lot of advantages, that has a lot of good goals, that has a lot of opportunities and benefits, instead of the fragmented political systems that we have. And once we are politically fragmented like this administratively, the enemy or those who do not want Africa to unite normally get hold of some states and use them against the whole idea of a continental union government. And we saw it during the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. We saw what happened, where they used some states controlled by Western forces to disrupt the unity agenda in 1963. You know, and so it is something that is not good, and it's something that is being driven by an indirect colonial rule, indirect advanced stage of colonialism, you know, and it is an indirect, this whole presidential system is an indirect rule, which is not good for the future of Africa, and which is not very, very, very healthy for Africans people, and which must be looked at, and then we integrate as one government. Thank you.
Africa has been center of war for ages. What do you think are the root causes for this persistent conflict? And how should this generation build a stable and peaceful Africa?
Africa has been a continent bedeviled with a lot of conflicts, which seems not to end. And immediately, many African states gained their nominal independence. There has been conflict dotted all over the continent. And I'm sure due to the numerous conflicts all over is what informed the African Union to declare the year 2020 as silencing the guns. Many of the Western countries are behind some of these conflicts because the best thinking for them is divide and rule. And so if you go and arm a section of the people because of one particular issue or a matter that can be resolved within, and out of emotions, out of thinking beyond the need of togetherness, people just run into the bush. And one of the major reasons we should be asking ourselves is that, where do they get the arms from to fight? Where do they get it from? I'm not aware of any African countries producing arms. Many of the arms that we find, many of the ammunitions that we find in Africa are imported. So the armament industry are making huge sums of money. But we should also understand that there's no war without an economic interest. And the economic interest here is the resources of Africa. Once Africa is bedeviled in conflict, the colonial powers, those who ruled Africa before or colonized Africa before, take advantage to plunder, take advantage to steal our resources. Because the whole idea is put them into confusion, let them be fighting among themselves, and we come out with the UN organizational structures that we want to come and do this and that and to bring peace, yet it looks like no end. And so you ask yourself, all these UN structures coming in the name of trying to, in the name of ceasefire and all of that, why is it that the conflict continue to happen? Okay. In a way, can one say that the UN organizations and their structures who are supposed to ensure peace or contribute to peace be part of the conflicts that we find ourselves? There has been allegations of UN vehicles or being spotted with raw materials in the Congo, mineral resources in the Congo. Whether it is true or not, this was out there, we all saw it. So the issue of African conflict is basically from outside. Let me put it this way, an imposed type of conflict from outside, just to destabilize Africa and have access to the resources of Africa. And going into the future, the best thing is that we should think and know that we are those suffering. All these resources being looted out of Africa are not to the benefit of Africa, but to the benefit of other people's generations and future.
Ethiopia has been striving to bring lasting peace in Ethiopia and other African countries. What would other African countries do to bring lasting peace in all African countries?
Ethiopia is a great nation from history. Ethiopia is the pride of Africa because Ethiopia has never been colonized. Ethiopia defeated the Italians when they tried to invade and to occupy Ethiopia. The sovereignty of Ethiopia as a federal state has been something built by the forefathers of Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia's stability is a condition towards the continental stability. And more to the point, we have the AU headquartered in Addis. And so it is the responsibility of all African countries having a stake at the AU to ensure that Ethiopia becomes stable.
There are promising developments in Ethiopia in running big projects and in modernizing agriculture sector. What do you think should be the contribution of other African countries?
The contribution of other African countries to this development is to encourage the government of Ethiopia, because the projects in Ethiopia are Pan-African driven, or the projects have a Pan-African character. If you look at agriculture, wheat production in Ethiopia, we know the situation that we find ourselves when Ukraine produced wheat and supplied wheat. And so should we have Ethiopia stabilized and then concentrate in agriculture, especially in the production of wheat, that could serve the continent and all of us. And so our desire or interest should be geared towards ensuring that we support the government of Ethiopia, not only through advocacy, but where they need be with expertise from other countries, and where they need be to politically encourage our leaders to see and also be part in owning the development projects in Ethiopia. The Renaissance Dam, when built, is not only going to serve Ethiopia with the benefits, its benefits, but it's also going to serve other African countries. And that is the essence of the Pan-African dream that we've all been looking for, and which was started by Kwame Nkrumah, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And so any project in Ethiopia looking very positive, progressive, is to the benefit of the people. And not only Ethiopians, but Africans as a whole. And so that is why Ethiopian stability and peace is key, because there's a lot that Ethiopia can offer the rest of Africa. And we should take into consideration that in the year 2030, the population of Africa is going to be doubled. And when the population of Africa doubles, there will be pressure on food. There will be pressure on food. There will be pressure on a lot of resources. And so any other project that looks continental in character is something that must be encouraged.
Regarding economic ties of African countries, what work has been started to establish market lines and free trade areas?
We now have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has been established and headquartered in Accra, Ghana. And one thing we must understand is that the protocols involved must be flexible and should benefit African businessmen and women first. The Continental Free Trade Area should not be an economic or trade platform to benefit people who are not African businessmen and businesswomen. That should be taken into consideration. And that also relies on African leaders to ensure that the African businessmen and women benefit directly from the African Continental Free Trade. There has been a lot of argument. There has been a lot of disagreements in terms of people looking at the details of the African Continental Free Trade and say it seems to represent neo-colonial interest. And they'll be right, because they have seen certain things in there which is not favoring African businessmen and women. One other area that is of importance is breaking the barriers to allow free movement of goods and services. Recently, Kenya and South Africa looked at the issue of visa, where Kenyans going to South Africa will no more require visa. Another country was Namibia and Botswana. That arrangement is in place starting from next year, 2023. So people can move freely to do their businesses, and so on and so forth. So it's something that is very, very positive and adds up if we look at the African Continental Free Trade Area. The first thing we should look at critically is what Kenya, South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana have done. Africa is for Africans. The resources of Africa is for Africans. Whatever opportunities are in there in Africa in terms of businesses should be for Africans. And being for Africans here means the African businessmen and women should be the first to benefit. And we shouldn't, the protocols shouldn't be so rigid, should be flexible in such a way that there should be free flow of businesses. We shouldn't make it so rigid so that it will benefit people, businessmen and women outside Africa. If that is the intention of the African Continental Free Trade Area, then it is a neo-colonial tool or a neo-colonial house. And they will have to prove to all Africans that just like many are thinking, or just like many of us are thinking, that it is not a neo-colonial house. And that it is an independent, continental, sovereign house for our people to benefit from it.
To have economically and politically strong Africa, what should African leaders and other stakeholders do?
We have had our independence, which is nominal, which is an advanced stage of colonialism, like I earlier on said. Economic independence, we are still struggling to attain. And the economic independence should be the concern of African leaders. One of the biggest problems that we have in Africa is on the question of leadership. We don't have leaders who think about the people. We don't have leaders who think about inclusiveness. We don't have leaders who think about the future generation. Many of them think about themselves. Many of them think about their families. Many of them think about a clique, a group of people. And so when they come to power, they don't concentrate on what benefits the broad masses of people. And that is the biggest challenge that we have in Africa. Now, all stakeholders must begin to see the political and economic independence of Africa as a big worry. As a big worry because it affects all of us, except an insignificant few who hold on to power and use the power to serve their own personal interests. The scientists have a role to play, the universities have a role to play. But let me tell you, my brother, this is the time for African cultural traditional rulers to raise their voices on the Continental Union question, to raise their voices on the economic independence of Africa, our traditional rulers. Let me tell you a typical thing. The reason why I'm saying so is that we have, after independence, there's a body called the Commonwealth. And the one presiding or heading the Commonwealth is the King or the Queen of England. But we've been told to distance our traditional rulers from central government. It's something we should look at. We know if we begin to empower our traditional rulers to be strategic stakeholders in terms of political and economic redemption of our people or our continent, we'll be making inroads. Aside from that, the churches and the most religious bodies also have a role to play. They have a role to play. They shouldn't behave like always going to praising governments, but they should be able to point to governments their wrongs. Because many of those who attend their congregations are citizens and suffering. Everybody should take this matter. It is time for us to move from concentrating on our leaders to solve our problems to we ourselves beginning to own the processes and to ensure that things are solved for us. But the end result is that we are those suffering. They are not suffering. That is why I am so happy with the recent arrangement between Kenya and South Africa and between Namibia and Botswana, and the role of even President Uhuru Kenyatta leading the East African community in terms of the Ethiopian question, and also President Olusegun Obasanjo, an elderly statesman of Africa. You know, African leaders should begin to think, unlike the past. There should be a departure from the way they used to think into something productive to the benefit of the African people and their children's children.
What has to be done by the African Union to bring all African countries together? And do you think that IGAD and other regional bodies are doing enough to facilitate this regional integration?
Well, the African Union has come out with a document called the Africa that we want 2063. And the Africa that we want document has been faced. And if you look at that document critically, the African Union, the AU, have succeeded in putting in the continental free trade area, but failed in other areas. That document talks about a federal government in the year 2022. We haven't seen any step, or we haven't seen steps taken to ensure that we let it come to pass. We haven't seen it. And African Union should cease to be a club of African heads of states. Should cease and should be a place of serious business. Because when they fly to Addis or any part of Africa for their summits, it is the taxpayers' money. They burn fuel. It's not for luxury. Business as it is should be it. Does it? We have the Eastern African community. They are pushing hard for integration. We have to encourage them, because if the African Union, for the reasons why it was set, are not living up to expectation, and some regional groups think that they can achieve that, they must be encouraged to move ahead, for perhaps that may influence other regional states to integrate properly, and finally, the ultimate continental union government. Because as it stands now, should we evaluate the performances of the sub-regional bodies? I don't know whether the universities, it's time for the universities to do some research and to evaluate the performance, or let me put the stewardship of leaders within the African Union and leaders within the sub-regional bodies. These are areas that the political science departments should look at, and later translate it in simple English and also into various languages, African indigenous languages, for people to know and better appreciate.
Don't you think that Africa will be united if there are common security forces, common currency and the market, and single passport?
Yes, Africa will be united if we have everything like you have mentioned in common. And a typical example also is the European Union. They have many of what you have mentioned in common, and they are united. If you take China, they have many states. They are together, provinces, they are together. They have many things in common, and they are united and strong. You take the United States, they have many states. They are united in many of what you have mentioned, and they are very strong. And so Africa being united in all what you have mentioned, all these sectors of production, then will become strong. And the more you become strong, your people benefit from it positively. We'll be able to fight poverty. We'll be able to fight hunger. We'll be able to fight diseases. We'll have well-coordinated system. Administrative political system will be well-coordinated, where the people will benefit from it. And we'll be able to have access to each other's territory. Somebody from Ghana can go to DRC. Somebody from DRC can go to South Africa. Somebody from South Africa can come to Ethiopia. Free movement of goods and services, especially when we connect the continent with common rail systems. You know, we can move from one end to another. So there'll be a lot of benefit. It will bring an amount of happiness. It will make people feel free and feel like being in the world. And for that matter, being Africans. But as it is now, it is not. People don't feel it. People don't feel the benefit of where they've been born. Born in the midst of resources, rich resources and wealth, yet, I mean, they are not feeling it. They are not enjoying it. So once we have this, then it means we are getting closer to integration. Once we get all these done, it means we are getting closer to the unity that we want, to the Africa that we want. Because we don't want the boundaries. We don't want the lines and the pillars of the 1884 Berlin Conference. We don't want it. Before they came, our people were free movement. Our people were moving freely. So we want our people to feel free. As it stands, our people don't have the basic human rights to do what they want to do because they are restricted. If you have a standing army, like Nkrumah advocated and called for, African High Command, they will take care of any civil unrest. Types of disasters will be handled by them. If you have a common foreign policy, if you have many of what he stood for, African Bank, common currency, and so on and so forth, we will better grow the continent in terms of industrialization. And then we'll better be in position to find job opportunities for our youth. When Africa is integrated through all these productive areas, many of the youth will not want to go outside the boundaries of Africa to go and suffer somewhere, because they think the opportunities are there. But in the actual sense, the opportunities are in Africa. But due to bad leadership, due to greed, and for leaders not wanting to integrate, for fear of calling themselves presidents, and having motorcades, and having security personnel, and being guarded 24/7, their own pleasures. So the youth will benefit a lot if Africa unites. And we should begin looking towards that direction as it was started in Addis Ababa, as it was continued in Accra, where the OAU was changed to AU. It is time for a mass mobilization.
Dr. Benjamin, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Dear viewers of OBN Horn of Africa, this is all from us for now. Thank you for staying with us.